Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm going to start from the top and do this again. So this is a posting for a job with the Government of Canada at the federal level. I'm going to be going through the post to speak to what you essentially need to do to fill out the application and to do it well in a way that ensures that you have the highest score possible when you apply. What tends to happen is that even if, for example, you are qualified for a job, you may not actually get a call back because the score that you have is not high enough. With this particular posting, there's some exceptions whereby even if your score is high, you might still not get it, but we'll get into that later. So the position is an occupational health and safety advisor. Uh, this is classification. I'll talk about that another time. This is the salary brand. And here's the closing date. So first and foremost, if you're going to be doing this, you got to get it done before 11 p.m. tonight um, Pacific time. If you're in another area, if you're out east, for example, um, you have an extra 3 hours, and so you can take advantage of that. Okay. All right. Now, important messages. Um, for the purposes of doing the application, as you go through it, they'll ask you these questions. So assessment accommodation, if for example, you need to do an assessment um, for an accommodation, for example, you need more time to do a test, or you have vision or you're vision impaired. This is information that you want to provide as soon as possible. And typically what you want to do is you send it to this person over here at the very end. And you send them an email and you let them know that you need to have an accommodation. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Diversity. Okay, I'm going to take a moment here to speak to employment equity placements. Again, the rules may vary slightly depending on a process and whether or not the hiring manager just decides to actually use it. What I do want to say though is that they don't just give a person who meets one of the EE requirements the job just like that. The person still has to be qualified for the job. Something that I've heard people say in the past, like, oh, they only got it because, they're X, insert equity group here. And you actually do still have to be qualified. What it means is that if you actually qualify, then you find yourself closer to the top of the list, whereby maybe they won't weigh your score in the same way as they would have um, if you didn't have the EE. I'll leave that there. Um, this basically means make sure you apply through the system. Okay, this here, number one, don't provide a cover letter. If they tell you not to do it, don't do extra work for yourself. You want to try to get this done and get it done as quickly as possible. So if they don't want that, don't provide it. With the resume, when you're writing your resume, in this instance, there's an actual application. And so the application itself kind of serves like the cover letter where you're providing examples. And then your resume is something that they may or may not actually look at. But in here, this is really great that they actually say it here. They might actually evaluate it. So don't lazy up your resume. Make sure you actually take the time to go through it and make sure that it is well written and well structured. Okay, this basically means you need to show up. Okay, this is also great. Things have really changed over time. They would not tell you, they would not always explicitly tell you this in the past. So basically, if you are sending them anything at any point in stage in the process, they are using that to evaluate your writing skills. Okay, I think they may have come to realize that the writing skills tests don't necessarily assess writing in the way that they want to be able to, in the way they would like. And so this is a way that it used to be done without actually telling people explicitly, which was not okay. And now at least they're actually being forthright about it, which is awesome. Um, Yeah, I'll let you read that. 3 positions to be filled. That's awesome. And it is locations across Canada. So if you're willing to move, um, Yeah, that would be something that you may want to think about because there are offices all over the place. Okay, and now we get to the real meat and potatoes right here, which is the experience factors. Okay, this is the approach that I would suggest. I should have started with this point here. So I think when I actually post this up, I'll start at this point. Wish there was a way that I can flag that for myself. Um, I'm not really sure. I'll figure that out afterwards. Okay, here's the approach that I suggest. Here's a scenario. Actually, we'll do the scenario right now. This post is due in a few hours, and you want to do a decent job to make sure that you actually have a chance of getting this job. Let's assume you haven't ever done a government job application in the past, and you're only used to doing private sector applications. I don't want to say forget everything that you know about applications, but you definitely want to forget the part about just being brief and keeping things as short as possible. Let me explain. That's both true and untrue. You want to keep things brief in the sense that you want all the information that you provide to be relevant, but you also want to be um, all encompassing. So any piece of experience that you have that applies to any one of these three, you want to make sure that you include them. So for this example here, experience working in an occupational health and safety program. Now, anything you've ever done, whether you were part of a volunteer committee or you did something in school while you were studying and it was related to a health and safety program. So when you think health and safety program, think emergency evacuation plans. Um, for most jobs, in the beginning of your job, you have this training that you have to take so that you know the different signs for corrosive products and things of that nature. So anything that can come to your mind, if you need to Google it, if you're not sure, and see if you can find anything at all that relates to an OSH and safety program, and you brain dump, okay? That's what I want you to do. I want you to do a brain dump about all of those things to make sure that anything that's relevant that comes to your mind, you pop it in. Don't think about trying to make a perfect response right off the bat. Step one is like ideate. Put down all of your ideas as much as you possibly can. And you do it again. Second point right here, it says experience providing OSH advice and recommendations. Again, anytime you've talked to a manager, with a supervisor, with a colleague, you noticed something that was off. You noticed that someone was for example, using a chair instead of actually using a shelf, or a person is who there's a cleaner in the office and they're using the material in a way that they're not supposed to. You're part of any type of committee and you're having discussions about, the workplace, then you could use that. Now, I'm using this OSH example in particular because I think a lot of people can kind of start thinking about scenarios where this has happened. Now, of course, if you have clear-cut occupational health and safety experience, include that by all means. This right now is me trying to get you to think about these applications a little bit differently, especially if you're coming from the private sector and these are things that you're not used to. And I don't want you to fall into the trap of thinking that you can't apply for the job because you don't have the exact direct experience. Anything that's adjacent, similar, included at the very least. And if you have something that's more concrete, of course, include that as well. And now this last one, significant experience in researching and interpreting legislation, policies, or directives. Now this is a one that I really want people to pay attention to because significant experience in researching and interpreting legislation, policies, and directives. What this means is that you don't actually need to have OSH specific experience doing these things. This is really important because again, I've seen it where people say, oh yeah, well, I don't have experience in that type of legislation, but I do have experience doing an Y type of um, of legislation. Yeah, great. Include that. It counts. They're not saying OSH. Okay, they're very specific about the language. And something that might be a helpful frame is to realize that there are people who are looking at these applications and they're looking to see whether or not they can say check yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. Okay, so that they can screen and determine whether or not you meet the qualifications. And the person who's doing the yes and the no doesn't necessarily actually know the job. Okay, so keeping that in mind means that you might actually be able to get away. I don't want to say get away, but it's a way to put it, with a little bit more, because it's not always the case that the person who is doing that initial evaluation to screen you in is actually like extremely familiar with their job. They might be familiar with the job description, but it's just something to keep in mind. And they have like a rubric that they use to determine whether or not yes or no it falls in. And you would be surprised the number of times that it's a yes and not a no. Okay, so be generous with yourself and allow yourself some grace and saying, yeah, you know what? I did do this. I have done this. It's not perfect, you know, but it's some experience. And then at least you can get into the pool, because that's another thing. Even if you don't necessarily get this particular job, in many instances, they'll then put you in a pool and then other opportunities might come up and other hiring managers might come up, see your application and say, you know what? I think this can work, especially if, they've this other application where they have all the different people within the pool, if there's stuff that they need. So the next section here, they're talking about the different language requirements. If they know that they need someone who has one of these requirements and it's for a different job, but they can see, you look at this significant experience in researching interpretation, blah, 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 but not for health and safety, for something else, they might be able to take you from the pool, right? So this is what I mean. You kind of have to be generous, because you never know who's going to look at the application at what point in time and whether or not things change over time. What's also especially interesting about this one here is that you'll notice it says here that you have to have significant experience for the last one only, but it doesn't say when. Sometimes what you'll see in a position is that it'll say, okay, you have to have done it within the last 12 months, 36 months, within the last 6 months. There's a recency factor, or within the last 5 years. There's no mention of that here at all. Okay, and I can look a little bit more closely, but yeah, I don't see it there. So keep that in mind. That means you can actually use a great deal of depth of experience for this one. The other thing I wanted to note as well is, again, the significant experience. Notice that the significant experience is only noted on the third one for 12 months experience. They're calling that significant, apparently. But it's not noted on the first two. So that means the length of your experience is, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it shouldn't hold you back. So if you're concerned that you don't have enough experience, it hasn't been 12 months that you've, been working on an OSH program, or you've been in an OSH committee, that's okay. You could still speak to your experience. Okay. Um, Anything else that I wanted to note here? Significant experience. Here's the other thing. Note the language here, okay? There's a qualifier. It says, experience normally associated with the performance. Normally associated. What that means is that you don't necessarily have to have the full 12 months once again. And this is why I actually picked this one. This one's so great. Look, it actually tells you shorter duration may be considered. This has almost always been true, but it has not always been explicitly, stated. Okay, so something to consider. Um, if you have like a really, like, if you say, for example, you had a really tight project that you were working on, right? Super tight deadline. it was a 2 month or 3 month exercise, and that was pretty much all you were doing. And you had to do everything from A to Z for that project. And I know that I've done one of those before, and those are rigorous, and you have to do so much, and you have to deal with so many people, and you have so many deliverables in an extremely short period of time. And it always kills when you think to yourself, oh, I didn't really do that project for long enough. That may not necessarily be true, especially in a situation like this, when they say normally associated. Pay attention to the language. Okay. Okay, what else did I want to say? Be mindful of all communications. I mentioned that because they're evaluating it. Use significant experience as a template. Ah, yes. Okay. So when you're actually getting to the point in the application where you are, how can I say this, actually writing out your experience, use this this language is so good. Okay. Depth and breadth. So that is how many, with breadth, what is the extent of which the different scenarios in which you've done this type of work? Then depth is how deep did you go? How specialized did you get? And so as you start thinking about those experiences and the brain dump that you did before, then you can kind of think, okay, did I do this something similar in multiple different scenarios? Yes or no? And if you have, list those down. Now, okay, how specific did I get? Is it like super industry specific? Did I do a very specific job that's really in depth and specific? I just said specific a bajillion times. Don't judge me. Anyhow, I'm gonna do a more refined version of this at a later time. I just want to get the information in. And that's how you're gonna wanna use that as a template to make sure that you provide as much information as possible. Okay, and what else did I want to speak to? Ah, yes, this is something else that you'll have to do. Now, this is for later after you've done your full, um, how can I say this? Your full answering of the questions. I'm going to scroll down later so that you can see what I'm talking about, but this is a really important one. Prepare your references, please. Okay. I understand that maybe you have a boss that you worked for who was really wonderful and you had a really great time working for them, but it's very possible if more than a year has gone by, they might have actually forgotten. And even if they didn't forget you, they might have forgotten what you did specifically. That big project that I was just telling you, like, oh, over a 2 month period of time was so important to you. There is one of you, like one of them to you, but that manager of yours, that supervisor of yours, probably had multiple different employees that they were observing at the same time. So it's very possible they don't remember that beautiful, extremely important job. And that's okay. What you need to do is make sure you prep them, send them an email, say, hey, I'm going to be using you. Well, first of all, ask if you can use them as a reference if they're not already on your roster. And if they're not, and if they are, then you say, you kind of give them some notes. You're not telling them what to say exactly in the reference, but you're giving them some reminders like, this is what I did. I really enjoyed working this project with you that we did at this time. Here was the value of the contract. Like, like whatever it is that you were working on, just give them a reminder. Okay, be slick with it. Don't tell them what to say in the reference, but definitely jog their memory so that they're actually able to provide you a good reference and that they're not kind of taken aback. I've definitely had situations where people have asked me, like, I just get a reference and for a person, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, um, okay, here's hoping I remember and try to be positive and say what I remember, but I really would have wished I got a heads up. Okay. Oh, this right here. Yeah, have a copy. Like, I feel like they might be more reasonable, but the things that you have seen people get screened out for in the past sometimes, on the opposite side of the spectrum of making sure that don't, that you give yourself some grace. On the opposite of that, if they ask for something, give them exactly what they ask for. If they're asking for evidence that you went to high school, because this position, if I remember correctly, only requires secondary diploma, give them a copy of your secondary diploma. Don't, again, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I would strongly recommend that if you don't do it, it's up to you. But don't just give them a copy of your, college degree or university or your associates, okay? Give them a copy of your diploma and um, your post-secondary education. Why? Because the fact that you it again, it's silly, so I'm not going to try to explain it because I don't even really necessarily agree with it. If they ask for something, give it to them. Give them what they ask for. And if you want to give them more, you can, but make sure you at the very least give them what they ask for, okay? And this right here is what I was talking about when I said that sometimes EE gets used a little differently. So this is how they typically rate people when I'm talking about making sure that you have the highest score possible. That's how they determine the order in which they're going to call people. But sometimes when EE is being selected, that order might get changed up a little bit. There might be some other reasons as well. They have some discretion in terms of how they do that, but typically speaking, in most instances, the managers want the people who have the highest score possible, unless there's like a very specific need that they're looking to fulfill. Say, for example, they have a team and they really need someone who is strong in team building. So maybe the person might not have the technical capacity at the highest level possible, but they have extremely strong team building capacity and are able to negotiate and build relationships really well. They might go for that person because that's what the team needs at that point in time. It's just kind of something that's kind of goes into the need to know more than anything else, but mentioning it now. Okay. Yes. Okay. Add email as a contact. Don't remember what that is. Oh, yeah. Make sure you use not your work email. So say, for example, you're coming from private sector, don't use your work email. I don't imagine people would do that, but people do that when they're internal sometimes and they use their work email because they're thinking, well, I already work for the government. Why wouldn't I? If you ever change jobs, if you ever leave the public service, if you ever take time away, either because you're sick or you're on vacation or anything along those lines, you need to be able to have access. Um, to your email address, right? And because they may not accept the fact that, oh, I was on vacation or, oh, I got pushed into spam or something along those lines. If they have lots and lots and lots and lots of applicants, they're just going to forget all about you. And they're just going to go for the people who actually provided them what they needed when they needed it because it's a sign that, okay, this person is serious about the job. Now I remember what I meant by add email as a contact. This email right here. This person, going back to the fact that they might not actually, how can I say this? They might not take your excuse, basically. If you don't show up when you're supposed to show up because you didn't get an email, mm, sometimes they're nice, but sometimes they're not. So just don't put yourself in a position where you're going to get screened out of something that you're interested in just because you didn't know any better, just because you didn't add them as a contact and they got stuck in your spam folder or junk mail. That's what I was referring to when I said add email as a contact. Okay, respond even with late. Now going right back to what I said before, I said, oh, don't respond late, but at the same time, not but, and, and should you find yourself in a situation where you are late, you fell asleep while you're reviewing the application, or maybe not the application stage, please try to get it on time for application stage because they're pretty strict on that one. But let's say they send you a questionnaire or a test and they say, okay, make sure that you submit the test by 8:55 on whatever date. And it's 9 p.m. and you're thinking, oh, well, I guess there's no point now. I wasn't able to get it done in time. Send it. That's what I mean. Um, if at worst case scenario, they say no. Best case scenario, they say yes. So you've already done the work, make the submission, do it. And at the same time, also, what that also means in those instances where, it's crunch time and you're almost done, but you don't think you're going to make it, just finish it. You know, just make it to the finish line, even if it's late, and then make the submission. You've already done the work. These take a long time, and so just make sure that you get not your money's worth, but your time's worth. Okay. So this is what you would see when you actually get into the application itself. So do you have experience working in application saving OSH program? Please specify yes, no. See name of the department. There we go. All right. See, I don't even have to say these things because it's already here now. Let me see if there's anything else I can add to support. Name of the department or organization where the experience was required. Where. Okay. Name, title of the position occupied during dates which you exercise the function. When. Okay. Specific details of task projects accomplishment demonstrating how the experience is acquired. How. Gives examples to demonstrate how you acquired this experience. Okay. So here. This is where I was talking about the star piece. I'm going to bring that tidbit down so that I can use it. This is where, was there anything else starstruck, responsible? Yeah, no, I guess I kind of have everything I need in my head. It's okay. We'll leave that alone for now. Okay, name where the department, okay, this is the one, number 3. This is the meat and potatoes right here, okay, guys? You want to make sure that you really provide good information. So what does good information look like? I'm starting to wonder if I should just write something up right now as I'm looking at it. I just want to make sure I do a good job, and I'm not sure if I can do that on the spot while I'm speaking live. Maybe I'll add some maybe after notes afterwards where I provide some examples of good responses. Yeah, I think that's what I'll do. I'll do that after. Okay, star here. I'll at least speak to that. So star situation. No, I'm not going to do that. This is going to take way too long. I'm trying to think of the best way that I can communicate this information to you while actually being helpful in a meaningful way. So please bear with me. So I think what I'll do is write. I'm not a very fast typer and I get nervous. So instead, I'm going to do what I know that I can do, which is write. So let's see if this is going to work. So we've got the screening questions. All right. When, how's that? Is that showing up? Oh, it's not working. Looks like I won't be able to do that after all. Sorry, guys. I'm in the right area. Yeah, I am. It's just not working right now. And that's okay. We'll figure it out at a later time. Okay, so what is the information that I want to give you right now that would be most helpful? Oh, it is working. It's just slow. Okay, so we're going to do star. So what is star? S-T-A-R. Okay, situation, task, action, result. Ooh, result. Okay, so when we're looking at the how, that's the setup. This kind of provides you with the structure. So I'm just going to make something up right now. So let's say situation. Okay, so the situation is that while I was working for Home Depot, I was responsible for ensuring that the no slip signs, these little things, I can't draw, you know, watch out, wet floor, like those little signage things. That was responsible for ensuring that those were placed after every time that there is a slip and fall. Well, that's not really the situation, but first you would say where you were working. So I was working at Home Depot, um, and this was my role, and that was what I was responsible for. Task, what I was responsible for doing was actually placing the, um, I'm making this up as I go, so it's a really bad example. I need to prepare a bit better. Um, okay, so I'm going to think about this. Situation, there were spills in the store. So there's water in the store. Task, I was tasked to ensure that the signage was placed appropriately throughout the store. Action, I ensured that all tasks, all areas where there was water was properly cleaned up, that the signage was clear and not obstructed, and that the signage that was put up was placed in an area that was visible, and when necessary, I added additional signage. I don't know, something along those lines. Now, what you also want to say is, in that action, the rationale behind why you did it. It was important to ensure that things were visible so that the policies of health and safety were met. And then it was important to me to ensure that I was upholding the organization's safety as well as preventing additional liability by not properly adhering to protocols and procedures. I don't know. I'm literally making this up on the spot right now. I have never worked at Home Depot and I have never done the thing that I'm describing. Okay. And then the result, you would be saying, okay, as a result of doing this, we had a accident slip rate of 0% over a 3-month period, blah, 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 blah. So with the results, what you want to do is make sure that you speak to the actual stats wherever possible. So were there any stats about health and safety? Were there, incident reports to show how many times like someone fell? Internal employees versus external employees. How many people did you maybe have to share these results with, or how many people were impacted by these results? How many people were in the building? So as you're like kind of building the story around the slip signage. I know it sounded really weak in the beginning, but as you can see now, as I'm talking about it a little bit more, and I'm also having a little bit more time to think about it, this is starting to become a pretty, relevant example. So now I've kind of brain dumped, like you literally just experienced me brain dumping a made up example. And now what I'm going to start doing is kind of refining it. Okay, wait a second. So the question is, do you have experience in an occupational health and safety program? Okay, wait a second. Did what I just described really speak to a program? Not necessarily, but what maybe you might have spoken to a program is how a discussion took place after this happened. And as a result of, you know, these things being placed in the past, we were able to improve the program. I don't know, something along those lines. Because usually what happens is, let's say, for example, there's a scenario where there was a slip and fall. If there's any type of mistake at all that takes place, ideally there are conversations that happen in response to that. And if you're part of those conversations in any way, shape, or form, you're making a contribution and are part of the health and safety program in a way because you're the very first line, right? So that's where someone who maybe doesn't necessarily have that direct experience can speak to an experience. And if you're able to quantify it and show that there's like meaning behind it, like, okay, um, we in the program that we have, and then again, this one's a little bit of a stretch, so and I don't want people to not be truthful in their applications. I want to make that clear. But the extent to which you're part of the discussions, you can speak that and you could be forthright about that, saying, I've had discussions with management. I was involved in planning, in providing support, especially for the next one, for example. providing advice and recommendations, because that's what you would be doing, right? Like if you were a person and you're in your workplace and you realized, hey, every time we have a spill, there aren't enough signs, right? So then your recommendation would be, okay, can we get more signs? And then you could speak to that example for number two. For the program itself, maybe if you're like a volunteer, something along those lines, then you can kind of get a little bit closer. But like I said at the top of this discussion, any instance where you're able to really like provide the description, brain dump. And if they choose that it's not good enough, that's up to them. Don't lie. Don't say things that didn't take place, but definitely you could speak to things that are adjacent, because this is another problem that I sometimes see, is that people won't provide a description of something that they were involved with because they didn't have the title of manager or supervisor or health and safety coordinator, and so they don't feel like they have the right to speak to the contributions that they made. This is me giving you permission to do that. You know, when you have that boss who, sometimes you have a boss and they might be kind, but maybe they're not the best at their job and you're really providing them a lot of support. Why wouldn't you put that in your application and speak to that experience? You know, or even sometimes just being in the presence of someone who has done these things and having those discussions with them means that you have a level of understanding that might actually be more than someone else. And from my perspective and things that I've seen, I think sometimes it actually works really well, especially if you're able to communicate it well. The thing about these job applications, and I think I'm going to kind of end it here because you basically do the same thing for all the other ones. The being able to do something, I think frustrates a lot of people. Being able to do the job is very different from being able to describe the job that you're able to do. Doing an application and filling out an application is a different and distinct skill. Okay. And it's already a challenging one because you don't typically get to apply for jobs all the time. I mean, some people do. I was one of those people who did that again and again and again. And so I just got good at applying for jobs. And then I got to be on the other side of things where I got to see what the job application process was like. But typically, when you're looking for a job, you're looking for the job. It's in a short period of time. You do what you have to do and you keep it moving until you get the job, right? And then you don't do it again for a really, really long time. That's that's what a lot of people do. And so when that happens, it means that sometimes you don't get better at it, or you keep using old skills and old tactics that may no longer be appropriate. So I encourage you to be kind to yourself, use all the experiences that you have, leverage them to the degree that you can, provide detail, use the STAR tactic, structure, I would say, to kind of answer the questions, and then stack. So that is, you know, stack your experience this way. And sorry, actually, this is, I would say, kind of like pile it this way, and then pile it this way, right? So this is depth, and this is breadth. And then what you do is you kind of get yourself in a situation where you're filling things out because you have, this is, I'm clearly not an artist. Um, you have information, and then you're kind of getting to the place where you're able to actually fill out the requirements of the position. And then you have role, right? Um, we didn't really see here, but typically there's a bit more of a job description. So this is one where I would actually contact the person at the bottom, or I guess in the case now the top, this person over here, and ask them if there's a job description for the role. Because there's not much detail here, and sometimes you can get some more insights about what the requirements are based on the job description, and then use that to kind of further refine the stack here to make sure that you only include the parts. So if you have stuff here that doesn't really matter, you can cut it out, cut it out. And you do this later, but first, like I said, you start with the brainstorm. You make sure that in your descriptions you use the STAR framework to kind of make sure that you're inclusive and you include everything that's required. You stack up your experience in there, and then you kind of make sure that you refine it to the role in terms of what makes sense. So for example, when I was talking about that example that I kind of came up with on the spot with that signage, okay, maybe I need to refine that a little bit. I gave an example, it's definitely health and safety related. What is it about the scenario that I could refine based on what I know about the role to make sure it makes sense, both for the role and for the question being asked? Because sometimes you kind of go off on a tangent like I just did right now. And then you must have seen it before. I put up. When I say star stack roll up, the up is speaking to your alignment with the organization's goals. And so when I was saying things in the results portion, I'm talking about, okay, I know that, Home Depot's priorities are ensuring that all of their employees are safe and well taken care of. And so you start speaking to that in your response and showing that you have an understanding of the organization's priorities and what their stated goals are and their stated objectives. And then all of a sudden, this again, silly example, this little silly thing here starts to look a lot more meaningful and like, wait a second, this person might actually understand our business. They might actually understand what it is that we need because they've taken the time to not only articulate their experience, but to align their experience with our needs and our requirements and what we believe in. And with that, I'm going to leave it there because now I'm starting to rant and I can talk about this stuff forever. I got a little bit nervous because I haven't actually done this in this setting before. I usually do it with a human being. And now I'm trying to do it live with not having an actual person to talk to. Stepping out of my comfort zone, and I encourage you guys to do the same so that you can achieve the things that you want to achieve and arrive to places that you have not yet been. Okay, leaving it there. Thank you. Hope you found this helpful. Oh, now just kind of some cleanup information. I have a guide. It's free. It's in the community tab. I have placed this job posting also in the community tab. And anything else you guys need to know about? I don't know. Well, if there is anything else, I'll put it in the comments so that it's not as long as this conversation was. Thank you to any of you who are either still here or still listening. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a lovely evening. And if you do end up actually applying for this job, whether now or later, or you actually get it at a later time, please do let me know. I'm very interested and very curious. And yeah, I will leave it there. Bye bye. Did I just talk?